This kid opened his eyes having no idea where he was. His classmate jabbed him. The teacher saw him sleeping in class. The whole room erupted in laughter. Of course, the class idiot was caught sleeping again. The teacher then stalked over and asked if her class was that boring. But Blair, he couldn't believe his eyes. Who is this woman? Boring. These curves are anything but boring. Just look at that geometry. They're perfect spheres. The teacher did not appreciate that look. She yanked him by the ear, pointed to the blackboard, and forced him to solve the problem. The kid's mind was still foggy thanks to that perfect geometry. He had to use his special technique to calm down and get the blood flowing from down their back to his brain. Blair finally saw the problem. Sum all the numbers from 1 to 100. Professor Brittany yelled at him to hurry up. If he was sleeping, he must know everything about the lesson. Cue more laughter. Blair was known for being the dimmest bulb in a box. But once he calmed down, Blair's entire demeanor changed. He got so confident it actually stunned the teacher. When he wrote the answer on the board, the professor couldn't believe it. Blair didn't gloat. He just said he needed to go to the bathroom to take care of something. The classmates were speechless. Could that answer actually be right? The teacher of the perfect curves was floored. How did he do that calculation in his head? Outside the classroom, we find out the truth. Blair has no clue what's happening. This body, it's not his. His real name is Chun-Lu, a world-famous math professor, a genius who became the youngest ever master. He doesn't know how he died, much less how he wound up in the body of this mediocre student. Besides, it seems like they don't even use basic math formulas here. Is this even his world? If not, he might just be the most brilliant person alive right now. Determined to find out if he's going to be this world's Isaac Newton, our protagonist doesn't notice a girl in the hallway. The two collide, bam, like a bowling ball hitting a pin. Blair's head hurts, but he feels something very soft in his hand that honestly made it all worthwhile. He scrambles back when he realizes the situation and offers the girl a hand. She is furious. Blair, you again? Blair, confused, just asks, do we know each other? The girl turns beet red, trying to cover her treasure, while screaming, you did the same thing on the first day of school, always touching me and trying to look at my skirt. He's just as arrogant and pretentious as ever. She hurled so many insults about this Blair kid that our protagonist froze in secondhand embarrassment. He tried to explain, but the girl was dead set on erasing his memories the unfriendly way. She started conjuring fire magic. Blair quickly tried a new tactic. If I'm really that weak and pathetic, isn't beating me up just cowardice? The girl wasn't listening. She was ready to barbecue his memories. Out of options, Blair resorted to sincerity. He apologized to the beautiful lady with the incredible geometry. And I swear I didn't see the color of any white panties. The girl was caught completely off guard. She actually calmed down, but before she could say a word, the culprit had vanished, running away from the blonde as fast as his legs can carry him. As he runs, he starts to process the insanity of this world where both science and magic exist side by side. Suddenly, a splitting headache hits him, and he collapses to his knees on the grass. His consciousness begins to fade. His body goes limp, and he passes out on the ground. Our protagonist's mind then drifts back to his childhood memories where he's seen calling out for his dad. The scene shifts to a reflection in a puddle, showing some people in front of a palace. A man hands a beautiful box to a woman, calling her his love and trying to comfort her. Right after, the woman grabs a child by the arm and rushes inside a big 2-story house. Inside, while she's tending to her things, she overhears 2 women gossiping. They're saying that the lady and the child were nobles, but the man who supported them had died. The memory flashes forward, and now we see a child running happily to tell his mom he got accepted into the Chananasa Academy. That child was Blair. His mother, worried, warns him about the dangers he's going to face at the academy. Looking at her son, she's reminded of her late husband and realizes how similar the two of them look. After that, the memories jump to his life at the academy, where our protagonist was constantly disrespected by his professors. He sets his mind on paying off his family's debt. After all, he's from a noble family that went bankrupt, so he has to work twice as hard. The problem is, the dude was born without any magic powers. He can't even make a simple little fireball. Because of that, his life at the academy was hell. Everyone made fun of his failures, which put our boy in a major slump. Then, out of nowhere, he wakes up and comes face to face with a girl with blue hair. She's calling out to him, all worried, asking if he's okay. Blair is totally confused, wondering who this girl is and how she found him there. The girl holds out her hand to help and tells him he needs to get to his magic theory class. Our boy gets up, leaning on her for support, and thanks her, kind of surprised. No one ever cares about him. When they get to the classroom, the magic theory lesson is already underway with the professor talking about the 4 basic elements. While listening to the explanation, the protagonist starts to figure out how things work in this world. You're either born a mage or you're a commoner. Meanwhile, the professor, a guy with graying hair, continues his lecture. He says that mages use spells, gestures, and spiritual power to control the elements. But to do that, a person has to be born with a gift. Time passes, and the class is finally wrapping up. The students all leave the classroom, happily celebrating the end of class. After the lecture, the professor notices someone stayed behind to ask a question. He looks over and sees it's Blair and asks without much surprise what he wants to know. Blair asks the professor if it's possible to learn magic without being born with a talent for it. The professor shuts him down right away, saying it's impossible to control the elements without the natural gift. Right then and there, the classmates still in the room start laughing at him, since everyone knows the protagonist has zero power. Then a guy named Toby comes over and tries to cheer him up. He says that even if Blair doesn't graduate, there will always be a place for him on Toby's father's lands. Hearing the name, the protagonist remembers that this chubby little guy was the only friend of the body's previous owner. After their chat, Toby gives him a big smile. The two say a friendly goodbye, waving to each other. Out of nowhere, Blair notices the blue-haired girl is looking at him. He asks if she needs something. The girl gets all flustered and runs out of the room, but not before telling him that Professor Brittany told him to go to her office after class. He finds himself thinking about that girl. She was sticking close to him all day. It seemed like she wanted to say something. The guy realizes that even though he's a math genius, that's not going to help much in a world of magic if he doesn't have any powers. With a sliver of hope, he decides to try and use what little magic he has to summon flame. He looks at his own hand, concentrates, and tries to use the fireball technique, hoping something will happen. His hope was already fading and despair was setting in because it looked like he had failed again. But then out of nowhere, his hand erupts in a bright orange flame. The guy is completely shocked, staring fascinated at the fireball in the palm of his hand. He doesn't understand a thing, just sees that yellow light glowing there. He can hardly believe it's real because as far as he knew, this new body had zero magical power, but there's no denying it. He has to accept reality and even lets out a sigh of relief. Right after, our boy starts playing around with his new power. Then he stops and starts to wonder how out of nowhere this ability appeared. He figures this happened because the worlds crossed over somehow. And out of nowhere, he remembers he needed to talk to the teacher. He goes to her office, knocks on the door, and hears a voice from inside telling him to come in. Apologizing for bothering her, our boy enters the math teacher's office, but when he looks inside, his eyes go wide and he turns bright red. He finds the teacher, who's pretty hot, in a really weird pose and just stands there staring, but she doesn't even seem to notice his reaction and greets him cheerfully. At this point, the protagonist is still frozen, just staring at her. The teacher, totally chill, tells him not to mind the scene because she always does her calculations in that position. Blair, still a little flustered, asks why she called for him. The blonde then asks him to sit in the chair next to her desk. She backs away for a moment, then comes back and puts a pen and paper in front of him. The boy looks down at the paper and sees it's a new math problem he has to solve. As he's getting ready to start, the teacher says she's going to step out of the office for a second, but without missing a beat, he spits out the answer right then and there. The teacher looks at him in shock, asking what he just said. He repeats the same number, confirming that it's the right answer. Suddenly, the blonde rushes over to him, grabs him by the shoulder, and starts asking all worked up how he solved it. Because for her, that problem takes forever. Looking a little angry, she asks if he'd solved that problem before, even though she chose the number 79 at random. The protagonist asks if she really wants to know the answer. She half-jokingly insists again that he tell her how he did it. The guy's gaze unintentionally drifts down to her chest, and he a bit shyly agrees to explain everything. He's even surprised thinking to himself that deep down his teacher is kind of naive. Without wasting any time, he jumps right into the explanation. He says he saw the teacher solving the problem by adding the numbers one by one. He says that's a pretty risky approach, and it's really easy to make a mistake, but he congratulates her because her calculations were actually correct. She looks at her papers totally confused and says that's the only way she knows how to solve it. Our boy gives a big grin and says she's wrong. He starts to explain a new way where first you have to find a pattern. According to him, you just take the first number with the last, the second with the second to last, and so on. Adding these pairs always gives you 80. He asks the teacher how many pairs of numbers that add up to 80 are in the problem. The blonde jumps out of her chair and shouts the answer 39. The boy immediately praises her and tells her to sit down, but then quickly apologizes, saying it was out of habit. He continues the explanation saying that this way, the problem stops being a giant addition problem and turns into a simple multiplication. He shows that with this method, she can also find the solution super fast. The teacher, excited to have learned something new, happily declares that this is a wonderful way to solve the problem. What's more, she herself comments that this method could probably be improved. The boy praises her for the insight and starts to explain that yes, there's an improvement for this method. After his explanation, the blonde just freezes up, trying to process the logic of everything that was happening. Seeing his teacher totally frozen, our boy calls out her name. Worried, he figures the basic math from his world is just too advanced for her. She finally snaps out of it and looks away, a little dejected, asking if he came up with that method himself. The protagonist dodges the question and just says he created the method to make calculations easier. In his head, he thinks that she'd never understand if he mentioned Gauss's name. Suddenly, the teacher grabs his hand and calls him a genius. To our protagonist, the scene feels pretty romantic. She says a bright future is waiting for him if they keep studying together. The guy turns bright red, says her name, and tries to say something. The teacher senses the mood, gets embarrassed, and backs away from him, scurrying off in another direction. But then out of nowhere, her expression changes as an idea pops into her head. All excited, she suggests that Blair become an amazing mathematician. His answer is a real quick no. With a look full of ambition, he shouts that he wants to become an incredible mage. She looks at him with a confused face and asks why. So, the teacher slams him down on the table and says he should be studying math, not wasting his talent. She tells him that as a mathematician, he could have a good position in society and that he should choose that path, not magic. Ignoring her, he forcefully shoves her hand away. Our protagonist says that what he cares about is magic and that he wants to be a mage, not a mathematician. In his opinion, being a great mathematician in this world is way too easy. You just have to spout off a few already existing mathematical theories. He feels like doing that would just be stealing other people's ideas, and that magic is way more interesting. After thinking for a moment, the teacher suggests they make a bet. She tells Blair that there's a magic exam coming up at the academy, which will decide whether or not he can stay. Our boy gets thoughtful and notes that if he fails, he'll be kicked out. The teacher confirms this and says that if he really wants to be a mage, he needs to pass this exam no matter what. A silence falls and the boy just stares at her with an unreadable expression, thinking about something. Then the teacher grabs a calendar from the desk and continues explaining the bet. She says that if Blair passes the exam, she'll stop getting on his case about becoming a mathematician. But if he fails, she'll help him get a spot as a teaching assistant so he can stay at the academy and study math. After explaining everything, she asks if he accepts the bet. In her mind, she's sure the guy won't be able to pass because he has zero magical ability. Without showing any emotion, but with a super confident look in his eyes, the student accepts the bet. Out in the hallway, the guy thinks about how stubborn the teacher is and complains that she's always on his case. He starts replaying the earlier scene in his head, imagining it in a much more romantic way than it actually happened. Noticing these kind of dirty thoughts, he decides to distract himself by going to practice some magic. But then out of nowhere, a girl with ribbons comes running towards him at full speed. They have a nasty collision and the two of the bonkats. After that, they both start falling to the ground at the same time. Our protagonist thinks the situation feels familiar, and then he feels something in his hand. When the pain fades, he opens his eyes and finds a girl sitting on top of him. The blonde realizes his hand is on her chest and right away starts beating the crap out of our boy. Pissed off, she decides to use magic and starts preparing a fire spell. Out of nowhere, an orange fireball appears in her hand. But then she realizes there's no one in front of her anymore. The girl gets furious, cursing about how the guy disappeared again. Far away, our protagonist breathes a sigh of relief, thinking that if he hadn't bolted out of there at the speed of light, he'd be barbecue by now. A little while later, this same girl who wears ribbons in her hair goes to talk to the math teacher. She comes in complaining that she ran into a pervert twice in the same day at the academy. After venting, she gets even angrier and swears that the next time she finds that pervert, she's going to blast him with a fireball without a second thought. The teacher finds the situation a bit funny and lets out a little chuckle. The girl, whose name is Isabella, quickly changes the subject. She says she's already finished the math problem the teacher had assigned. All proud, she mentions that she solved it all in one night and brags, thinking no one could have done it faster. The teacher even praises her effort, but bursts her bubble by saying that a guy named Blair solved the same assignment in just 1 minute. Isabella's jaw drops, completely confused, and she asks how he managed to do it so fast. The teacher explains there's a specific mathematical theory for it, and offers to show her. So, the teacher starts explaining exactly how the method Blair used works. After the lesson, Isabella has that look on her face like she's still processing everything, but little by little, it starts to click and she begins to understand the logic behind the theory. Then, she realizes something and is shocked. She can't believe that Blair himself was the one who came up with it. Right then and there, Isabella decides she has to meet the genius who created this theory. She asks the teacher about him, her eyes sparkling with excitement as she waits for an answer. The teacher finds her whole reaction a bit strange, but agrees to introduce them. It's not long before Isabella just kicks a classroom door open and storms in. She starts yelling in front of everyone, asking where the guy named Blair is. She makes it crystal clear that she really wants to meet him. One of Blair's friends, completely startled, is just about to open his mouth to answer. But out of nowhere, he gets a hard pinch on the thigh to shut him up. And who was it that pinched him? None other than Blair himself, who was hiding under the table. The chubby friend gets the hint right away and makes up a story for Isabella, telling her that Blair had just left for work. She gives the guy a confused, "Are you serious?" kind of look and asks a rhetorical question. Seeing it's no use, she gives up on waiting and asks the guys to let Blair know when he gets back. His friend gives her a little wave, super relieved, and promises he'll pass on the message. As soon as Isabella leaves, the classroom door slams shut. Only then does Blair decide to crawl out from under the table, making sure the blonde girl was really gone. After that whole scene, a super awkward silence falls over the room, and the entire class just stares at Blair with a "what the hell was that" look on their faces. Not understanding why he's suddenly the center of attention, he asks his friend why everyone is staring at him. In response, his friend, who has a bandage on his face, just grabs his shoulder tightly. His friend, with a desperate look on his face, asks Blair to spill what went down between him and this Isabella girl. Blair is totally lost, completely confused by the guy's reaction. Seeing this, his friend gives him an "Are you insane?" look and asks if the protagonist has any idea who this girl even is. Our boy gets a little wary and carefully asks who the girl that just walked into the room is. His friend starts to explain that she has a lot of connections that could stir up some serious trouble, but Blair just brushes it off, replying that inside the academy, nobody can touch him. Then his friend, looking like he's already seeing this go south, asks for the academy's name. Blair answers nonchalantly. The next question is about the campus location, and our boy, totally chill, says it's on Baker Avenue. And that's when the bomb drops. His friend tells him that campus is in the city of Yabo, and the mayor there is none other than Isabella's father. That's when it finally clicks for Blair. He understands the deep crap he's in and starts freaking out, wondering what to do. He realizes he's screwed and asks his friend if he can just apologize to the girl, but out of nowhere, a shout from the back of the room calls out Isabella's name, and the two of them whip around, startled. It's a blonde guy with his crew glaring at our boy. He says that a nobody like Blair won't even last 2 days there. This blonde guy's name is Bod, a dude who always bullied our protagonist in the past. Blair's friend tries to defend him, but on the inside, he's thinking the blonde dude is totally right. He thinks this because at that academy, if you don't have any skills, you get zero respect. And to make matters worse, all the second-year students have to take an exam. Anyone who doesn't pass is out expelled. In theory, the magic exam is super simple. Anyone should be able to pass it easily. There's just one catch. Blair has zero magical ability. For him, this exam means the end of the line. Suddenly, he's snapped out of his thoughts by a loud slam on a nearby table. It's B furiously yelling at Blair, asking if he's deaf or something. The air instantly gets heavy, and the blonde guy starts cussing him out relentlessly. Our protagonist's friend doesn't let it slide, his expression hardening as he gets ready to talk back to B. The blonde is challenged to a fight right then and there for being such a cocky and rude jerk, but he's totally confused, asking what Blair's friend, a guy named Toby, has to do with any of this. The tension between the two explodes, and they're just one step away from throwing hands. B, with a furious look on his face, promises he won't forget this. He turns and leaves with his friends, saying that next time Blair is going to pay for everything. Our protagonist just watches, looking a bit pale as the bullies leave the room. He's even surprised to see that Toby, his chubby friend, defended him like that, proving he's a true friend. Straight up, Blair asks Toby to help him out with Isabella if any trouble starts. Toby agrees, but warns him that by that point, he'll have already beaten Blair up himself. After that, Blair just stares at his friend with a what? Look on his face, totally confused. A few days later, the magic exam finally begins. The professor announces the rules and warns that anyone who fails is out of the academy. The task is simple. Students have to stand behind a line and hit a target with a fireball. The exam kicks off with B, who struts in all cocky, making it clear he's the best one there. He whips up a fireball in no time and nails the target dead on. The instructor praises the guy and tells him he passed the exam. The test keeps rolling with everyone taking their turn. Suddenly, in the middle of the crowd, the blonde bully spots our protagonist and his friend and lets out a smug laugh. He walks over to Blair and tells him with a smirk to enjoy his last few minutes at the academy. Pissed off by the taunt, Blair's chubby friend tells the blonde kid to shut up. And what a coincidence! The next one to be called is none other than Toby. Without wasting a second, he starts prepping the fireball spell. Out of nowhere, a small orange flame appears in his hand. He shouts the name of the technique and launches the fireball. It flies out and just barely grazes the target. The instructor, without much enthusiasm, says that Toby passed. Even though he just scraped by, the guy is ecstatic that he made it. Next, the instructor looks at his list to see who's up. He was about to call Blair, but then remembers the kid doesn't even have any magic power. The instructor, feeling sorry for our boy, tries to avoid embarrassing him in front of everyone, so he just starts wrapping up the exam, pretending he forgot about Blair. But then the blonde bully shouts out, telling the instructor not to end the test yet. He points out that there's still one student who hasn't taken the test. The guy points right at our protagonist and yells loud enough for everyone to hear that he's already failed. Blair just stands there silent and still waiting to see what the instructor will do. The instructor a bit awkwardly asks the kid if he's going to take the test. The blonde bully's crew hears this and starts laughing their heads off, mocking Blair. As the crowd murmurs about the protagonist, a math teacher happens to be passing by. Blair's friend tries to cheer him up, putting a hand on his shoulder and telling him to just ignore the jerks. But then out of nowhere, our boy's entire vibe shifts. With a look full of confidence, he decides he's going to take the test. After all, the blonde kid and his crew are completely shocked by this, not understanding what Blair's talking about. The shock wears off fast, and they all burst into laughter, clowning on our protagonist and already counting on his failure. All the noise catches the attention of the math teacher, who gets curious and moves in for a closer look. The magic instructor, annoyed by the commotion, tells everyone to settle down. Blair is asked one last time if he's sure he wants to do the test. Our boy, with a determined look, tells Professor Antonio that he's ready. The instructors, still trying to be gentle, tell him not to feel bad if he ends up failing. The protagonist gets in position in front of the target and focuses. He takes a deep breath, thinking about the best way to put on a show for this crowd. He's incredibly confident and knows he doesn't need any incantations or hand gestures to do what he wants, just to put on a show. He decides to go through the motions anyway. He yells out the name of the fire spell, and everyone looks over the target, holding their breath. Our MC pretends like he's straining super hard to summon the magic. The crowd around him even covers their faces from the smoke coming off him, trying not to get burned. When everyone opens their eyes, they look at Blair's hands and see no sign of magic at all. The blonde kid and his buddies see this and start laughing their heads off, thinking our boy totally screwed up. But out of nowhere, a flicker of fire appears in his hand and fiery circles spread out around him. A massive fireball forms and shoots straight toward the target. When the spell hits the target, there's a gigantic explosion of flames. Absolutely everyone there, students and teachers included, just stares in awe, their jaws on the floor. After the fireball, the target is nothing but a pile of smoldering rubble. The magic professor, in total disbelief, says that Blair has passed the exam. The blonde's face completely changes and he blurts out that it's impossible because not even he could get a result like that. Only Tob is genuinely happy for his friend, asking him why he'd been hiding all that talent. Suddenly, the professor calls our MC over for a talk. The math teacher is also off to the side, completely shocked, wondering how the kid pulled that off. Blair goes to the magic professor's office and starts spinning a tale about how he trained every single day with books, and that's how he managed to master the fireball spell. The Professor Anthony explains that magic is a gift from the gods, and that people without any abilities were called a godforsaken, and they had all assumed Blair was one of them. But now it seemed the gods had rewarded Blair with this gift, which was an incredibly rare occurrence. He praises our MC and encourages him to keep studying, telling him he has massive potential. Our boy thinks to himself, already tired of it all, that every single teacher at this academy is trying to force him to learn something. Then out of the blue, he says he appreciates the praise, but he wants to go back to his own world. The professor looks at him completely confused and asks what worlds he's talking about. Our MC instantly realizes what he just said and tries to play it off, saying it was just a joke and that he let it slip by accident. But Anthony doesn't quite buy it and just figures he's been studying too hard. He assumes Blair was talking about the world from the legends of a sacred master. As soon as he hears about this master, our boy gets super interested in what the professor is saying. According to legend, there was a sacred master who could control space and travel to other worlds. But everyone thinks it's just a myth. Our MC looks at the professor expectantly and starts asking more about these legends. He suddenly grabs the old man by the shoulders and declares that he needs to become a sacred master. Some time passes, and Blair starts to seriously study the history of this world. He stays up late in the library, burning through all his energy as he plows through a ton of books. From the information in the books, he discovers that there are different power levels for mages in this world. In total, there are 7 different tiers. The sacred masters were only ever mentioned in myths and legends. Their magical abilities were only described in ancient texts. A lot of old books say the holy masters had space magic and could just rip open space to travel between worlds. People these days think that's just a legend and that other worlds don't exist. But our protagonist is still holding out hope that this is his ticket home. The problem is Professor Antonio doesn't believe in any of that, so he's not going to get much info out of him. Just then, the library administrator walks up to Blair and asks how he's doing with his studies. Blair gets a little nervous as the administrator tells him to stop just reading and help out a bit with the library work. Left with no choice, our boy agrees to take a break from the books. After his shift, he's totally wiped out because he had no idea working at the library was so tough. When his shift is over, it's time for class. The moment our protagonist walks into the room, a weird silence falls over the place. Everyone's whispering about his test results since he did surprisingly well. The chatter wouldn't stop, and this sudden popularity was starting to weigh on him. Out of nowhere, he spots Isabella out of the corner of his eye and just freezes. He doesn't get what this girl is doing there and just stares at her, barely breathing. The blonde is sitting in a kind of weird pose, which makes our boy super flustered. He even tries to turn away, so he doesn't have to look. Suddenly, Isabella shoots up from her seat and shouts for the whole class to hear that she didn't know that guy was the same Blair. Seeing things were about to go south, the protagonist tries to calm things down and shut down the conversation. But the girl cuts him off immediately and calls him a pervert in front of everyone. Blair still tries to find a way to calm the blonde down, but then he sees fires starting to form around her. She concentrates all her power in her hands, preparing a fire spell. Not knowing what to do, the scared kid can only cringe and cover his face with his hands, but he doesn't feel a thing. Surprised, he opens his eyes to see why the attack never hit him. Right in front of him is the math teacher who stopped the clueless student. The teacher, with a disappointed look, asks Isabella why she's using magic inside the classroom. The mayor's daughter even tries to explain herself, but the teacher cuts her off before she can even speak. Right after that, the teacher calls Blair to her office. And it doesn't stop there. She decides Isabella has to come along too. Not wanting any more trouble, our boy agrees and quietly heads to the teacher's office. The 2 students and the teacher quickly leave the room, slamming the door behind them. After that crazy scene, all the students are left in silence, trying to process what just happened. A blonde guy in the class was in shock, not understanding why Blair was getting so much attention. Meanwhile, in the teacher's office, our boy explains all the awkward situations that went down with Isabella. The teacher tries to get the 2 of them to make up, saying it was all just a big misunderstanding. With the teacher pressuring her, the blonde girl ends up agreeing to forgive the guy. Then, the teacher changes the subject, bringing up the magic exam and praising the protagonist for his effort, saying the bet between them was officially over. She says she was really intrigued by his performance and asked him to show her how he managed to evolve out of nowhere and gain magic abilities. Our boy turns her down, saying it was just luck and that actually he's the one who has some questions for her about magic. The blonde doesn't push it and just waits, curious to see what he's going to ask. He then drops the question to use an element. Do you really need to use hand gestures and recite spells? Isabella, who never misses a chance, puts into the conversation to make fun of the protagonist, calling his question stupid. Realizing his question sounded kind of dumb, Blair a bit awkwardly asks if there are any exceptions among mages. The teacher starts to explain that even the most powerful mages need spells and gestures. The only difference is that at their level, they can do it a lot faster. She goes on saying that magic is a gift from the gods. They were the ones who taught people to use gestures and spells to summon the elements. To do it without anything, a person would need what they call divine enlightenment. The student finds a question so absurd that she asks why the teacher is even answering it. So seriously, the protagonist starts wondering if, because he's from another world, the gods here simply overlooked him. All of this was basic magic knowledge, and if he wanted to be a mage, he needed to study the theory first. But the teacher called him over for another reason. When the girl had already mentioned, she hands him a folded paper and explains it's a scientific journal where the most important works are published. Isabella, who was nearby, sneaks a peek at the journal and is shocked. She notices the math teacher's name alongside our boy's and has a totally over-the-top reaction. The teacher explains that she figured out the summation method the boy demonstrated and even wrote a paper on it. But the black-haired guy can only think about one thing. If he's going to make any money from this publication, since his library salary was a total joke. And as if reading his mind, the teacher suddenly calls his name. She hands him a small pouch of money and says it's his reward for his work. This was a ton of cash, covering more than 2 years of the salary he was making at the library. With a joy he can barely hide, he pretends to be embarrassed to accept it and offers half the money to the teacher. Naively, she agrees to the proposal on the spot and takes half the cash for herself. Blair's face falls instantly. He never expected her to actually take his money. The pain is immense because he only offered it out of politeness. With a single sentence, he got rid of half of all the money he had earned. Because of this, he started having some dark thoughts about how he needed to get out of this world as soon as possible. But suddenly, something catches his full attention, and he stares intently at the teacher with a newfound interest. He wants to know if every article published in that scientific journal pays the same amount of money. In response, he hears that yes, the payment is for each published article. And out of nowhere, a brilliant idea pops into his head, one he just has to share. He suddenly starts explaining a new theory, one he brought from his old world. The teacher realizes what he's talking about and calls it Hughes's enigma. Our boy, who's not really up on this world science, gives the girl a confused look. She explains that Ralph's riddle is a math problem created by some ancient sages. The story goes like this. Ralph has 7 sons. Each son has 7 bags. Each bag has 7 cats, and each cat has 7 kittens. The problem itself doesn't involve huge numbers. If you just add everything up, you'll get the answer. But the thing is, if the numbers were bigger, it'd be really good to have another way to solve it. So, the blonde with genuine interest asks if he can solve Ralph's riddle using a different method. With a confident look, he replies that he has a few ideas about it. The girl gets super inspired by his answer and asks to work with him on this new method. Time passes as they work, and after a few hours, the student who'd been in the office the whole time ends up falling asleep in her chair. Suddenly, she's woken up by a scream right next to her. The one screaming is the professor. She's jumping for joy, saying, "Our boy finally solved the problem." Isabella, surprised, asks the protagonist if he came up with the idea all by himself. He, in turn, gives her a sly look and asks if she really wants to know the answer. The blonde is incredibly curious, and she insists on knowing. In response, he says he doesn't have any special skills. He just studies like crazy. The girl, jaw-dropped, asks if he's telling the truth. A while later, she's still thinking about what he said. Out of nowhere, something unexpected happens right in front of her, leaving her shocked. She spots the protagonist in the 3rd-year building and wonders what he's doing there since he's a 2nd year. She promises herself that she'll catch him in the act this time, but before she knows it, she's lost sight of him again. By this point, the protagonist is already near a high stone wall behind the 3rd-year building. This was the place Toby had told him about, hoping his friend wouldn't do anything stupid. With a light jump, our boy hops over the wall and suddenly remembers his magic teacher. He told him that if he wanted to learn about magic, he should go to the Magic Association in the city of Yabo. Behind the wall lies something surprising, and the protagonist freezes for a moment. He takes it all in, appreciating the city's unique architecture. The area feels peaceful and quiet, but the main street is bustling with activity. Merchants on every street are calling out to potential customers, hoping to sell their goods. The black-haired guy casually strolls through the city, taking in all of its beauty. His attention is drawn to an imposing castle with beautiful white walls right in the center of it all. He recognizes it right away. That's the Magic Association he was looking for. Before heading inside, he carefully pulls a mask of some sort out of his pocket. He needs to be careful. It's best not to reveal his identity needlessly. Since the association's entrance was pretty quiet, he went straight to the main desk. There, he runs into a blue-haired girl who immediately offers to help. Our protagonist instantly recognizes her as Molly, one of his classmates, and wonders what she's doing working there. The girl offers him the services of a high-level mentor, but charges an insane amount of money for it. When our boy hears the price, he's a little shocked, not getting it at all. He obviously doesn't have that kind of cash, so he just gives up on the idea and starts to leave the building. But then Molly calls him back. She says that if money is the issue, he can just sign up for the association's library. Booyer turns around surprised and even asks again just to make sure he heard her right about this library. Turns out the Magic Association's library has thousands of books on the subject. And the best part, it's free. The protagonist, realizing he won't have to spend a single cent to learn, gets all excited and asks to sign up on the spot. But to do that, they ask him for a mage certificate, which unfortunately he doesn't have. Molly thought he was already a mage and explains that the registration is meant to prove that the person actually knows their stuff when it comes to magic. She says he can just prove his skills right then and there by showing what he can do. The guy's a bit hesitant and asks if it's possible to take the test right there on the spot. It is, but Molly warns him that the specialist on duty today is a real hard ass. Apparently, only 10% of people pass his test. Even so, our protagonist isn't discouraged and agrees to take the exam. especially since jumping the wall again wouldn't be very practical. A little while later, they arrive at the examiner's room, a guy named Andrew. Our boy notices that the man is wearing a red mage's robe with 2 silver stripes. This means he's a mid-level mage of the fire element. The mage doesn't waste any time and gets straight to the point, asking who the boy is and why he's wearing that mask. The guy introduces himself as Chunluo from the previous world and explains that the mask is to hide a burn he got while training. The old man sitting next to him makes a snarky comment, saying his fireballs must be pretty special for him to have managed to burn his own face. Andrew, with a bit of interest, finds the boy's name odd and thinks that given his age, he could only be a low-level mage at best. Molly suggests they go to the exam room to test the guy's skills, but she gets a blunt no, which leaves her looking surprised. The examiner says they don't need a room and that the test can be done right there, inviting our boy to show him what he's got. Baelier looked at the mage, surprised, wondering if he was serious about him having to use magic right there. He's confused by the lack of space in the room. The old man looks at him mockingly and says that Andrew won't get hurt by the pathetic little fireball the boy will probably create. Our boy, for his part, doesn't even bother to argue and just accepts the conditions. He stops right in front of the examiner and begins to concentrate all his magical power into his hand. The mage isn't too fond of the way the spell is being cast, but to everyone's surprise, a massive amount of power starts to gather in the protagonist's hand. Suddenly, everyone realizes the fireball is going to be massive, and Andrew screams for him to stop, but it's already too late to cancel the spell, and the guy decides to use his skills to the fullest. The entire room is lit up by the brilliant flash of a massive fireball. A bright light takes over everything, and the fireball heads right for the examiner. The guy wasn't expecting that kind of power and tries to take cover behind the door. Then out of nowhere, a massive explosion goes off inside that little room. After the explosion, there's just silence, dust, and smoke everywhere. The girl who was watching breathes in all that soot and starts coughing nonstop. She tries to pull herself together to see what went down at the end of the test. Through the black smoke, she sees an old man coughing who seems to have cast some kind of spell. Where the examiner was standing, there's now a giant blue shield protecting him. Andrew, meanwhile, is on the floor covered in dust, trying to figure out what just happened. So, it was the white-haired old man who managed to put up the shield in time and save the bald mage. He keeps holding the barrier with a dead serious look on his face, trying to peer through the smoke. The examiner is in such a state of shock that he doesn't even react, and the older mage has to shake him by the shoulders to get him to snap out of it. The girl just stares at the whole scene, completely in shock. Our boy, realizing the confusion, immediately apologizes to the mages. He explains that he thought everyone was prepared for his spell, and that's why he went all out. After all that chaos, the protagonist passed the test. A little while later, he's in another room getting his mage certificate and a library card. He takes the documents and starts looking them over. The girl from before walks up and says she was blown away by what he did in front of the examiners. The protagonist, whose name is Chunluo, thanks her for the compliment, says his goodbyes, and leaves. The thing is, he called her by her name, and she's left standing there confused, trying to remember where they know each other from and how he knew her name. Arriving at the library, Chunluo is impressed by the sheer number of books. He doesn't waste any time grabbing a book and sitting down at an empty table to read. Our boy is surprised because the books actually contain a lot of really important information. He's mainly interested in the ones that talk about magical and spiritual power. Basically, a mage's strength is defined by their level of spiritual power. The more spiritual power you have, the stronger your magic. And that's not all. High mages can even control the elements of weaker mages. But the explanation about the 4 magical elements in the books is kind of all over the place because the knowledge in this world is pretty basic. The mages here think that these 4 elements are the foundation of everything. Not just magic, but the entire world. To them, all other elements are just a combination of these 4 primary ones. From the perspective of modern science, this idea is super outdated. Any student knows that matter is made up of various elements from the periodic table, not just 4. But since magic and magical elements are real in this world, the protagonist can't find a scientific explanation for it. Then out of nowhere, an idea hits him. What if it's possible to interact with the magical elements in a different way? Lost in these thoughts, he suddenly leaps out of his chair, startling everyone in the library. If his theory is right, he might just be able to create a completely new kind of magic. Out of nowhere, he gathers the papers that were on the table. Without a second thought, our boy gets his stuff and bolts from the library. He needed to test this crazy idea and went straight to the Magic Association. When he gets to the association, completely out of breath, he runs down a hallway, and the guys who administered his test recognize him. The examiner and an older man were sitting there, still kind of in shock from what they'd seen earlier. To help set the scene, A blue-haired girl was serving them tea. This Andrew guy comments that this Chinoluo has extremely low spiritual power. But even so, he managed to create a huge and super powerful fireball. And the weirdest part is that the old man couldn't even control the element the kid summoned. The gray-robed mage thinks maybe the kid has some secret they're not getting. It was already getting dark, so the protagonist decides to get out of the city and head back to the academy. On the way, he just hops over a high stone wall like it was nothing, and he lands smoothly on the other side on his feet without kicking up a single speck of dust. Our boy doesn't want to waste time and decides to try creating that new magic right then and there. A bunch of ideas start popping into his head, and he struggles to focus and create something different. The protagonist takes a deep breath and out of nowhere feels a strange energy, a whitish flow, one he doesn't recognize, starts swirling around him. He figures out that this energy is coming from his own body and that he can control it. He tries to direct this flow of chi to create a second element. A ball of magic forms in his hand, and it transforms into oxygen. But then he's not sure if it's actually pure oxygen. There was no way to tell just by looking. So Blair gathers the oxygen he created in his hand, making it denser and more concentrated. He figures if it's really oxygen, all he has to do is set it on fire to be sure. But the first attempt is a bust. He adds fire, and only a little puff of smoke comes from his hand. Without losing hope, he tries the crazy experiment again. He creates the oxygen in his hand one more time, compresses it tight, and lights that thing on fire. Suddenly, a giant explosion goes off all around him. The shock wave is so strong, it shatters the windows of the nearby buildings. To give you an idea, even a glass that was just chilling on the math teacher's desk started to crack all over. The teacher hears that huge noise coming from the street and drops what she's doing to see what happened. Through the window, now completely cracked by the shock wave, she sees the explosion that went off near the building. In the middle of a patch of grass, a ton of sparks and clouds of smoke are rising up. Our boy is right in the middle of the whole mess, trying to breathe in the thick smoke that's formed around him. The wind starts whipping everything through the air in a weird way. Then, the protagonist thinks he got really lucky for reacting so fast. Out of nowhere, our boy's face is covered in sweat, and he's got a look of genuine fear. He looks to the side, trying to figure out just how much damage the explosion caused. Apparently, that oxygen was way more powerful than our protagonist had imagined. Suddenly, he hears a voice yelling from a distance, asking what happened. Our boy turns around and sees some guy running towards him. He didn't expect it to be that loud. The protagonist decides it's best to bail before he gets into trouble, so he bolts into the woods to hide. Despite the chaos, it seems Blair managed to create something worthwhile. A while later, we see him in the classroom thinking about everything that went down. He's exhausted from pulling an all-nighter studying, so he decides to take a quick nap right there at his desk. But peace is not an option for him, and out of nowhere, someone starts slapping him hard on the back. It was Toby, who frantically starts telling him about the drama from last night. To avoid suspicion, our black-haired boy says he slept like a rock. The word is there was an explosion near the third-year building that shattered all the windows. Everyone thinks some super powerful mage did it, but nobody knows why. Our protagonist comments that he's never seen a mage like that, and his friend gives him a shocked look, asking what he means he's never seen a Heil mage. After all, their math teacher is a super Heil mage. Hearing this, Blair's face is one of pure shock, and he even jumps out of his chair. A little later, our protagonist decides to go talk to the teacher, and the scene cuts to him knocking on her office door. She opens the door almost immediately and greets her student. Our boy came at the perfect time because she actually wanted to speak with him. She tells him that the Mathematicians Association has already published an article on Ralph's enigma. And since he was the one who proposed the solution, his name is listed first among the authors. The teacher congratulates him for solving the most difficult problem in mathematics. But brushing that aside, he says he's here to discuss something else. To the blonde teacher's surprise, he says he wants to study math with her and asks for her help. After hearing this, she just stares at him completely confused. The guy wanted to be a mage, but suddenly he decided he also really liked math and didn't want to regret it later. He even says he feels like he must have been an incredible mathematician in his past life. The teacher, overcome with emotion, takes his hand, calling him by his name. She can't control herself and presses his hand against her own chest, saying how happy she is to hear that. She hugs him and says that from now on they'll study math together every day after school. Dying of embarrassment, the guy tries to pull away from the hug, gently pushing her with his hands, and uses the moment to ask for help with magic, too. Still totally flustered by the scene, he hears her agree to everything and decides to get out of there as fast as he can. Our boy is already rushing for the door, dying to get out of there. He opens it, but the blonde teacher calls out to him, reminding him about their arrangement for the next day. He just agrees, wanting to bolt, but then out of nowhere, she tells him to stop and wait another minute. So, she sits on her desk, clasps her hands, and tries to figure out how to say what's on her mind. Blair is totally confused, staring at her nervously. Then, it dawns on the teacher. The black-haired guy only agreed to the math lessons to get help with his magic. She's troubled by this because she realized his request wasn't sincere. Seeing he's been caught, the protagonist panics, trying to come up with a quick excuse, and suddenly, he gets a brilliant idea to get himself out of this. He blurts out that since they're going to be spending so much time together, it'll be easier for him to ask about magic. But before he can even finish his sentence, the teacher's hand comes down hard on his shoulder. She grips him tightly, and the boy gets super confused, scared of what she's going to say now. But the teacher says he has a talent for math and that he can use it as a tool. Apparently, our boy's answer was enough for her. She tells him to go get some rest and not to forget to come back after school. Blair thinks to himself that this girl is both smart and a little silly at the same time. Time passes, and the next evening, Blair shows up for his lesson. He opens the teacher's classroom door without even knocking and just walks right in. Suddenly, he sees two girls up at the front sitting at the desk and chatting. One of them, Isabella, clearly isn't happy to see him there, probably because she wanted to talk to the teacher alone. Without missing a beat, she straight up asks what he's doing there. The teacher then apologizes to Isabella and explains that she forgot to tell her, but from now on, Blair would be having lessons with her too. The teacher asks Isabella to look after the new guy, but from the look on her face, she's not a fan of that idea at all. The blonde then calls the protagonist over to sit next to the other student and says she's prepared a problem for him. The question was this. A stone is dropped into a well. A little while later, another stone twice as heavy is also dropped. The question is, when will the second stone catch up to the first one? Isabella starts to answer, saying they need to know the time between the two drops. But before she can finish, Blair cuts her off. Our boy, without hesitating, flat out says the second stone will never catch up to the first. He explains that if you ignore air resistance, a heavy stone won't catch up to a lighter one. His answer leaves the blonde girl sitting next to him really irritated. She accuses him of not even knowing the basics. According to her, everyone knows that an object's falling speed depends on its weight. The heavier it is, the faster it falls. She says that this is what the ancient sages discovered, and that even a child knows it. But our protagonist isn't buying it. The look on his face shows he's getting pretty pissed off too. He shoots back that just because a bunch of ancient sages said something, that doesn't make it true, and asks if she's ever actually seen it happen in real life. The blonde gets pissed that the guy dared to question the wisdom of the ancients. The vibe gets tense between them because neither one wants to back down. So, our protagonist tells them straight up that science has to be precise, and that if a truth can't be proven, then it's not a real truth. Another student suggests a bet, but the guy says no. The teacher tries to calm things down so everyone doesn't start a fight, but then out of nowhere, the mayor's daughter bets 10 gold coins. He instantly agrees. The teacher just face palms, frustrated that she can't stop the black-haired kid. After a while, they find a spot to do the experiment. She tries one last time, saying that one stone is twice the size of the other and that they should just drop the whole argument. But he holds his ground. After all, he wasn't about to pass up on some easy money. Nobody there thinks he's going to win because everyone believes in the ancient sages. The blonde even comments that being confident is one thing, but being this cocky is another. Right after that, some white platforms of wind appear in the air. The teacher steps on them and starts to float. A bluish wind propels her upwards higher and higher and faster and faster. Our boy, who had never seen flight magic before, is just gawking at the scene. He and Isabella are down below, just watching the teacher go all the way up to the top of the clock tower. Up there, she raises both hands, each one holding a stone, a bigger one and a smaller one. The mayor's daughter is already calling a win, saying he's definitely going to lose. To make sure the test is fair, the teacher lines up both stones at the exact same height, and then she lets go. The stones go into free fall, and for a second, it looks like they're at different heights. They get closer and closer to the ground, picking up speed. But suddenly, both stones hit the grass at the exact same time. The blonde's jaw drops, unable to believe what she's seeing. The guy, on the other hand, just give a little smirk because he already knew the outcome. The teacher, from way up there, also has a look on her face like she has no idea what just happened. She uses the spell again and slowly descends to the ground to get a closer look. The two stones are still there sitting on the grass, while the trio just stands there thinking about what just happened. Isabella finally seems to get it, and her face is just pure confusion. The two girls can't believe how that was possible. To them, the ancient sages couldn't have lied. The teacher is left wondering how in the world her student knew that the law of falling bodies was wrong. He then explains that he read about it in a book, but when he went to test it with two stones, he saw that reality was different from what was written. Turns out, a truth that adults had taught for over 1,000 years could be debunked simply by dropping 2 stones from up high. It's pretty crazy to think that so many scholars never even bothered to check if the truths they knew were actually real. The blonde grabs him by the shoulders and says this law was super important for their world and that pretty soon a new law will show up in the books with Blair's name on it. The guy isn't too happy about all this fame he's getting, especially since he wasn't the only one who did the experiment. The professor tries to smooth things over, saying the credit was all his and that she just played a small part. But if he wants, he can refine this law together with Isabella, and the girl gets all excited about the idea. Our protagonist replies that he'll definitely need her help to finalize the law and invites her to join in. All of a sudden, all the shyness vanishes from her face, and she looks at the guy surprised. Her mind starts racing, thinking hard about his proposal. She even imagines the newspaper headlines, announcing that 2 geniuses have appeared at the academy and are working together on a new law. Her face turns red again as she thinks about the possibility of working with the guy. The girl decides not to show what she's feeling, and trying to play it cool, she timidly agrees. The blonde is lost in thought for a while, realizing they'll have to work alone together. She starts imagining possible names for the new law, thinking about how their names would be side by side in the title, which makes her blush again. Then, out of nowhere, she offers to help our protagonist if anyone messes with him at the academy, all while thinking about how smart and handsome he is. Suddenly, the guy holds out his hand to her, and the girl immediately thinks he wants to shake hands. This gesture made Isabella all flustered and even a little upset without even understanding why. She decides to ask what he wants with his hand out, and in response, he asks for 10 gold coins. Our protagonist clearly meant something else by that gesture, and his eyes start to sparkle at the thought of the cash he was about to get. The girl was super disappointed for getting it wrong and backed away from him, a bit sulky. In the end, our protagonist gets the promised payment from the bet and starts counting the coins. He's thrilled for winning 10 gold coins in a challenge and getting rich in a single day. Isabella figures out that the guy is more interested in money than fame, but she still feels like that's not the whole story. Our protagonist gets thoughtful after her words and goes silent for a moment. The girl with genuine curiosity decides to ask him what he really wants. This question catches the guy by surprise because until now, he hadn't really stopped to think about it. He considers everything he's done in this world, and suddenly something clicks. Memories of his past life flash through his mind of how he used to grind as a teacher. He remembered his students, his job, and his friends who he left behind in a world that's long gone. After diving into these memories, he finally finds an answer to give the girl. But what he wants apparently isn't something he can just go around telling people. So, he just denies that he's only in it for the money to live a better life. With a fake smile on his face, he says goodbye to Isabella and the professor. Without getting the answer she was hoping for, the blonde thoughtfully watches the guy as he walks away. She realized that he's carrying some thoughts he can't share with anyone. A day passes and Blair is already sitting in the classroom, thinking that sleeping at his desk is way more comfortable than in his tiny room. But looking at the situation, he comes to the conclusion that at least now he has money. He knows he can't just stand around, so he's got to keep moving. Just then, a blonde guy named B slams his hand on his desk and calls out to Blair. Grudgingly, B tells him that some guy named Feej is looking for him. Blair is completely confused and asks who that is cause he's never heard the name in his life. B doesn't like that answer, gets pissed and grabs our boy by the hoodie. But out of nowhere, a voice tells the guy to let Blair go immediately. And nearby, another blonde guy appears, all dressed up and adjusting his tie. Turns out this was the Feej guy, the big shot who was looking for our protagonist. And he didn't come alone either. He had 2 very serious-looking guys with him, staring at Blair like they were trying to burn a hole through him with their eyes. This Feej guy looks at Blair with contempt. Our boy, on the other hand, is just curious since he's never seen the guy before. The blonde in the blue shirt then turns to our protagonist and asks if his name is Blair. He sizes Blair up from head to toe and lets out a sarcastic little laugh standing right in front of him. That's when it clicks for our protagonist. With a serious face, he tells the guy to let him go and introduces himself, asking what's going on. The smug blonde warns Blair to stay away from Isabella. In his mind, a guy like Blair shouldn't even get near a girl like her. After delivering his message, Feej tells his crew to scram, and they all take off. On his way out, the blonde bumps into Toby, who is just passing by. The chubby guy can't take the impact and awkwardly falls to his knees. He's so scared he doesn't even dare to say a word, just quietly waiting for the group of bullies to leave. A bit awkwardly, Toby walks up to our protagonist and asks if he's okay. Blair says he is, that the guys just wanted to talk, but Toby is super surprised that Feej came at Blair out of the blue and can't figure out why. Then Toby explains the situation. That blonde guy is Feej, the class president, and everyone at the academy is terrified of him. He's for the famous Howard family and is the son of a Viscount. And to make matters worse, his dad is a big shot in a secret society, and a bunch of the teachers here are members too. Toby tries to smooth things over, saying he understands Blair being charmed by Isabella's beauty, but he warns his friend not to ignore Feiji's warning. At this, our boy gets all flustered and embarrassed because that wasn't what he was thinking at all. Time passes, and soon it's noon as classes come to an end. Blair is already sitting with Isabella, but he's totally zoned out, thinking about how to properly use his new oxygen technique. The big advantage is that he won't need magic or hand signs, but the problem is he still doesn't know how to use two elements at once. He's snapped out of his thoughts by Isabella, who tells him to stop slacking off. She tells him to solve the problem the math teacher assigned. Our protagonist, yawning with boredom, simply hands her a piece of paper. When Isabella looks at the sheet, she sees a bunch of formulas and realizes he'd already solved everything a long time ago. She's left speechless since she only managed to solve half the problem in the same amount of time. Our protagonist then says, "You can't just solve everything the same way." According to him, the secret is to find different ways of thinking. Ignoring his smug attitude, she looks down at the paper, a bit embarrassed. Taking advantage of the silence, our boy remembers he wanted to ask her something. He's curious how she can summon 2 fireballs at once, and she replies that she can actually summon a whole bunch of them. This information leaves the protagonist shocked, and he just stares at her confused. The blonde realizes the black-haired guy can only make 1 fireball at a time, and starts making fun of him. He explains that he's read a ton of books about magic, but never found anything about summoning multiple spells at once. The girl, in turn, says the books only teach the basics and don't cover these more advanced techniques. To learn that stuff, you'd have to hire a really expensive magic consultant. But she adds, if someone called her sister, she'd help them learn herself. Without skipping a beat and with a completely straight face, our protagonist calls her sister right on the spot. The girl wasn't expecting such a quick, direct response and is completely caught off guard. The deadpan expression on his face when he said the magic word left her all flustered. But since a promise is a promise, she agrees to teach the guy. After this, they leave the academy and find a more secluded spot to train. The girl focuses and casts the spell. Suddenly, a bunch of yellow fireballs appear floating all around her. Our boy is completely amazed by the sight, since he can barely even create 2. What really catches his eye is how stable her spells are. The girl explains that the main secret to summoning multiple fireballs is the distribution of spiritual power. Most people believe that spiritual power can only be focused on a single point, but once someone masters this technique, they can distribute their power to different points. Each of these portions of power is capable of summoning a spell, and that's how you summon multiple fireballs. The protagonist then asks if it would be possible to summon different spells using each portion of power, and she excitedly confirms. As they're talking, a golden-haired guy watches them from a distance. His name is B, and he thinks the two of them have a thing going on. Next to him, someone else is gripping a part of the wall with so much rage that it starts to crack. The boss, who is nearby, also saw the scene and looks on nervously. He vows to himself that the protagonist will pay dearly for this. At that very moment, our boy is training hard, trying to split his spiritual power into 9 parts. The blonde explains that he needs to follow her instructions and split his spiritual power step by step. With a smile, she tells him not to feel bad if he can't get it, because it took even her 6 months of training to learn. Suddenly, just as she finishes speaking, a bunch of fireballs appear all around the young man. The girl stares in confusion at the scene before her and asks how he managed to do that. Totally nonchalantly, he replies that he just split his spiritual power into 9 parts and summoned the fireballs. But the girl isn't buying that excuse and asks how he managed to pull that off so quickly. Blair looks over at her a little surprised and just says he simply understood the technique and was able to use it. An answer that's simple leaves the blonde completely stunned. She just stands there for a moment staring at the guy. Her face turns bright red, thinking that he wasn't just a math genius, but a magic one too. Then she starts getting really pissed off because she trained for way longer than he did. To save face, she decides to lie, saying she's done the same thing before. With her pride wounded, the girl just ditches the training session and runs off. Our boy has no clue why she's so mad and just chalks it up to another one of those I don't understand women moments. He puts his hand in his pocket and suddenly feels something weird. It catches his attention and he stops to see what it is. Meanwhile, the girl still hasn't cooled off and is stomping angrily toward the academy. Out of nowhere, Blair runs after her and grabs her arm. Isabella is startled by the move and asks if he needs something else. That's when she notices his hand is held out, offering her something. It was a bracelet of sorts with a really pretty golden cat charm on a red string. The protagonist offers her the gift, calling her by name, and tells her to take it. He says the only reason he learned the magic was thanks to her help, and he appreciates it. She stares at the bracelet, breathless, wondering what to do. Her face flushes red again, and she bites her lip, completely flustered as she stares at the protagonist. Surprised, she says he actually has some sense, and that maybe he isn't so stupid after all. The blonde then snatches the gift out of his hand with a quick move. Trying not to show how she really feels, she runs off in a fluster, yelling that the gift is ugly, except since she was running with her eyes closed. Her legs get all tangled up, and she takes a super goofy fall onto the grass. Without even asking for help, she scrambles back up, laughing nervously, totally mortified. Then she turns to see his reaction. Blair is surprised and a little thrown off by her stare, not sure what to do. But before he can say a word, the girl scrambles up and takes off again, shouting a few insults over her shoulder. She vows that she won't give up so easily, but all Blair can do is let out an exhausted sigh. After that whole scene, he decides to take a break and lies down on the grass to chill in the sun for a bit. He figures if she really didn't like it, she wouldn't have taken the gift. After all, he spent 50 silver coins on that thing. The guy was thinking that he originally planned to give the bracelet to his math teacher, but then he suddenly spots something right in front of him. 3 guys walk up to our protagonist, who's just lying there on the grass. One of them, B, reminds our boy that the class president had already warned him to stay away from that girl. Him getting close to the mayor's daughter was making the president pretty damn nervous. Without saying a word, our MC just gets up from the grass, looking dead serious. Then out of nowhere, he turns his back and just bolts from the guys who were giving him a hard time. The blonde dude and his crew weren't about to let that slide and took off right after him. The thing is, our boy saw no reason to fight these guys. But then one of the 3 decided to run his mouth, saying Blair's dad died a coward, fleeing in the middle of a battle. Hearing that about his family really struck a nerve, and our MC stopped dead in his tracks. The blonde dude, seeing his opening, kept taunting him. He thought Blair had let his guard down and tried to sucker punch him from behind. But as he threw the punch, his fist just stopped in midair right in front of our boy's face. The bully was not expecting that at all. Since he'd thrown the punch with all his might, the recoil sent him flying backward, and in the end, he was the only one who got hurt. You could see on Blair's face that he was seriously pissed off by the gang's actions. Meanwhile, the blonde dude could barely even get back on his feet. His hand was completely burned, and he was in excruciating pain. This just made our MC even more furious, and he declared that his father was a brave warrior who died for his homeland. He added that his dad was an amazing father who deserved respect even in death. Blair then threatened them, saying that no one gets to insult his father. Fueled by his rage, 9 fireballs suddenly appeared floating around him, grabbing the bully's attention. They were completely shocked by Blair's skill, because as far as they knew, he had 0 magic. The thought of being burned alive terrified the guys, and they bailed immediately, leaving their leader behind. Now alone with a furious Blair, the blonde dude looked up at him, terrified. What he saw was enough to make him panic and start begging for his life. The bully tried to save his own skin, saying that fighting was forbidden at the academy, but all he got back was a look of pure contempt. At that, the panic in his eyes faded, replaced by sheer desperation. He just stood there frozen, staring at Blair with no idea what to do. Our boy, having no intention of stopping, raised his hand to unleash the fireballs. The magic converged and began to move toward the guy, but all of a sudden, our MC sensed a presence behind him. Meanwhile, B squeezed his eyes shut, threw his arms up to shield himself, and screamed for help. When he didn't feel any pain, he thought it was weird and decided to open his eyes. In front of him, the 9 fireballs were gone, and instead, there was a guy collapsed at his feet. Completely confused, he tried to process the scene, looking at Blair just lying there peacefully in front of him. The blonde dude was still in shock, but he nervously poked Blair to check if he was still alive. Seeing an opportunity, he decided to make a run for it before our MC woke up. But he was stopped dead in his tracks by a commanding voice. Standing in front of him was a math teacher who was already tending to Blair. The blonde dude tried to make excuses, claiming it wasn't his fault. And all this time, our MC was still just lying on the grass, faking being unconscious. The blonde guy keeps trying to explain himself, but the crowd isn't buying it. The professor lays on even more pressure, saying she knows exactly how he feels about Blair. The whole argument, which was going nowhere, is cut short by a guy with a beard and mustache who just shows up out of nowhere. He tells B off since our black-haired boy was right there passed out on the ground. This just proves that the blondie was lying the whole time. The man then orders B to go straight to his office and wait to face the consequences of his actions. He goes to talk to the vice president, saying this is all the academy's administration's fault and apologizing for the scene. The 2 men walk away discussing the situation while the girl tries to wake Blair up. She's worried about his condition, but suddenly she feels a weird chill. The protagonist pulls away from her a bit, and his face just freezes in a mix of embarrassment and a certain excitement. The girl sees this and thinks he's genuinely not feeling well, but he replies that he was fine, right up until she was practically smothering him. She then gives him one of those big motherly hugs and says she was really worried about him. Just then, an older gentleman approaches and says this whole mess will be sorted out, but that they came for another reason. The girl takes the lead and decides to introduce the two men to Blair. The older one's name is Arkell, and the younger one is Calvin. Our boy bows respectfully, greeting the two academy employees. Apparently, our black-haired guy is already getting famous, and they already know him as the young man who helped Professor Brittany solve the Ruvos enigma. But the professor cuts the old man off, correcting him that it was Blair himself who solved everything on his own, and she just wrote up the report. Thanks to solving this enigma, Blair and the professor have been nominated for the Edwin Award, which is a huge source of pride for the city. And if they want, these men will do everything in their power to help the two of them win. But the girl is more concerned about whether our boy can get the award too. The old man sighs, as if he was expecting that question, and looks at her. He explains that Blair is still way too young, and nobody in the world of mathematics pulls off a feat like that at his age. If the professor says he was the one who solved the Ruvos enigma, simply no one will believe her. The girl is about to start arguing, but the protagonist calls her name and takes her hand. She looks at him, her face sad and a little disappointed. Breaking the tension, Arkell suggests they discuss this more calmly and decide on everything later. She agrees, and the two men slowly walk away. Time passes, and night begins to fall at the academy, bathing the building in a beautiful orange light. The professor and Blair walk down the hall in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Suddenly, she tells our boy that even though the standard solution to the enigma was no big deal, the method he used was a giant leap forward in the history of mathematics. The award has to be his. It makes no sense for anyone else to get the credit for it. This leaves Blair a bit stunned, and he quickly scrambles for something to say. After a moment, he says the award shouldn't be his. He then adds that as far as he's concerned, Professor Brittany stopped being a stranger to him a long time ago. The compliment makes the teacher turn bright red. She's surprised, but in a good way. Embarrassed by her own reaction, she tells the student to just head home, leaving him wondering what he could have said wrong. A little while later, a crowd had already gathered around the bulletin board. Everyone was talking about the paper Professor Brittany published, and of course about the student's name who helped out. People were blown away, saying that scientists had spent centuries trying to solve the Ruvos enigma and failed. While everyone was talking about him, our protagonist decided to blend into the crowd to go unnoticed. And it worked. Nobody spotted him. But then, not too far away, he suddenly hears a bunch of shouting and cursing coming from a room. He recognizes the old man he'd met before and sees someone else in the back of the room. It was Bod and his father. The dad was seriously chewing his son out over the fight. The guy's parenting style was pretty intense. And to teach him a lesson, he just starts slapping his own son. Our protagonist watches this, furious, but with no intention of getting involved. After slapping the kid around right there in front of everyone, the blondie's father starts begging Arkell for forgiveness, pleading with him not to expel his son from the academy. But what Bod did was too serious. He broke the school's rules in a major way without even letting the old man finish speaking. The blonde kid's dad just drops to his knees, begging with all his might for the director's mercy. He stays there in that position, desperately pleading for them to let B stay, despite the mistake he made. B is shocked by his father's actions and tells him to get up. But Blair, despite everything, decides to step in. He walks up to Arkell, greets the director, and is greeted in return, pretending he didn't hear a thing. Our boy asks the director what happened with B. Instantly, the blonde kid's face fills with rage when he sees the black-haired guy decided to get involved. Arkell explains that the student started trouble, broke a major rule, and the academy had already decided to expel him. Swallowing his pride, B's father, still on his knees, grabs Blair's sleeve, thinking he can help. He says he'll teach his son a lesson and begs for forgiveness, explaining how hard it was to get his boy into this academy. If he got expelled, his life would be over. After all this drama, the black-haired guy just sighs. Getting ready to speak, he turns to Arkell and calmly asks him not to punish the blonde kid so severely. The bully, hearing this from the very person he'd been provoking, is just completely shocked. After hearing the request, the director says the academy can suspend the expulsion for a while. B and his father are totally surprised and relieved, but Arkell warns that if he pulls anything like this again, there won't be a second chance. In response, the blonde kid's father forces his son's head down, making him bow in respect. Then he orders B to thank Blair and Arkell, too scared to disobey his dad. The blonde kid bows and thanks the principal and Blair. The old man accepts the apology and tells them both to get a class. They get to the auditorium door, and our boy is just about to open it. But then the blonde kid stops him, asking why he decided to defend him. With his hand on the doorknob, our protagonist stops and thinks for a bit. He explains that he only did it because he didn't want me to disappoint his own father. The kid stares at the floor, thinking about what Blair said. After that, he turns around and gives him a genuine thank you. He also tells him to watch out for FaZe because that guy isn't going to let this go. He adds that FaZe's uncle is the academy's vice principal. Later, after class, Blair heads to the library like always, thinking about the complicated day he's had. Out of nowhere, the librarian shows up at the door with a really serious look on his face, making it clear this wasn't going to be a good talk. Our protagonist wasn't expecting to see him there and asks what he's doing. The librarian gets straight to the point and asks if Blair has gotten into a fight with anyone lately. Our boy is surprised and totally confused, asks if something happened. Then he gets the news. He can't work in a library or live in his room anymore. And to make matters worse, it's a direct order from the vice principal. After this bombshell, our protagonist decides to find Professor Brittany, the one who's wanted to take him and Isabella to a math seminar from the start. Blair explains he can't go since he got kicked out of his room and now has to find a place to stay. In response, the professor invites him to live at her place, saying she has a spare room. Our boy gets all flustered by the offer, already imagining what it would be like to live with her. Worried, he asks if it would be a bother for her to have him living there. She calmly replies that it's no problem at all because that way they can study math anytime. Her answer kind of makes sense to him, but he's still beat red anyway. They seal the deal, and she tells Blair to meet her after the ball. Suddenly, Isabella barges into the room without warning and immediately asks what our boy is doing there. The professor explains that Blair is also going to the seminar with them, and that from now on he'll be living with her. This last piece of news makes the blonde furious, and she immediately starts complaining. Not understanding her student's reaction, the professor says that Blair isn't a bad person and there's nothing to worry about. Meanwhile, our protagonist just stands there wondering why he's getting yelled at again. To cut the tension, the professor practically kicks the girl out of the room, telling her and Blair to go get ready for the seminar. Then the professor asks if he has clothes for the event, explaining that it needs to be something formal. Not knowing what to wear, he asks if a magic tunic would work. The professor says that if he has one, that's perfect. Some time passes, night falls, and the ball begins. Everyone starts trickling in, and there's our boy on the red carpet flanked by two girls in gorgeous dresses. When they get to the place, Isabella announces that they've arrived. It's the Howard family mansion, the same place the Magic Society holds its events. And this Magic Society is a super important organization in the kingdom, which is why they always use the Howard Mansion for everything. Turns out this mansion is their class representative's house. Up ahead, three guys are standing around having a pretty heated discussion. Just then, their teacher, Brittany, walks up to one of them, Vice President Calvin. Calvin notices the teacher in Blair's group and gives everyone a really cheerful greeting. Our boy right away greets the guy back. Isabella, who's standing beside him, is confused about where they know each other from. The vice president then asks Blair to introduce his friends, mentioning they were just talking about him. Professor Brittany decides not to interrupt their chat and backs away, saying she'll catch up with them later. Blair and Isabella walk into the mansion and their jaws just drop, looking at everything around them. Our protagonist is blown away by how fancy the party is and makes up a line for the food table. Without a second thought, he starts grabbing a ton of snacks and drinks, scarfing it all down in a flash. But Isabella is not happy about this scene at all, thinking he's embarrassing them. Suddenly, something catches Blair's eye, and he looks over in one direction with a lot of interest. He sees a huge painting on the wall showing two rivers connected by several bridges. The blonde girl explains that this is the Howard family's greatest pride, the painting called the Seven Bridges of the Royal Capital. Blair, kind of confused, asks for the painting's name again, making it obvious he had no clue what it was. Their conversation is overheard by the homeowner's son, a playboy who, making fun of him, starts insulting our protagonist for the way he's acting. Isabella can't stand the guy's attitude and defends Blair, saying he's their guest.